My name is Sally Deckard. I'm a Faculty Support and Development Associate here at Ashford, and I will be your host for this TLC session, Teaching Through Serving, the Application of Servant Leadership to Asynchronous Education. Our presenter today is Dr. Kurt Stuke. Kurt is an adjunct faculty member at Southern New Hampshire University, New England College, the Community College System of New Hampshire, and of course, Ashford University. As an associate professor here at Ashford, he fosters the exploration of organizational behavior and leadership. Kurt holds a doctorate in leadership as well as a master's degree in philosophy and theology. Recent publications may be found in the Journal of Quality and Participation and the Open Journal for Business and Management. Recent speaking engagements include the Lean and Six Sigma World Conference, the Quality Show, the ASQ World Conference, BossCon, and more. And I am very happy to present Dr. Kurt Stuke.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We've actually gone through a dry run, so this is not cold. We're working with a net here. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about servant leadership as it applies to education. At the end of that, we'll have a Q&A. Throughout the period here, Sally will be monitoring the questions, and those will be answered at the end of the session. Just a little bit of housekeeping, but just to make it clear that's what's going on. And also, I'm working off of two screens. So right now, I'm looking at the camera. But if I look this way, I'm also looking at a bigger screen because older eyes sometimes need bigger screens. So, but let's begin. By the way, the picture in the middle there is Robert K. Greenleaf. He's credited with founding the servant leadership movement. And throughout this presentation, I will be talking about not only Robert K. Greenleaf, the seminal thinker within servant leadership, but also Larry C. Spears. But more to come. So let's begin. I think we all know that leadership obviously is the topic of this session, but also that teaching is a form of leadership. If we go to the etymology, and I don't know if we have any philologists in the house, but education itself is from the Latin ducere, meaning to lead, or e ducere, to lead forward. So we know, I doubt there are very few people that would say that teaching is not a form of leadership. So that much is clear. But what is leadership, especially within our context? And I think there are two competing models that we can talk about. And the first one is one that we're all familiar with. And in this case, we put the teacher first. And by putting the teacher first, I also mean the institution first. So sometimes for accreditation purposes, we're forced to prioritize policies or standardization or learning outcomes. And these are all very reasonable ways to go about it. And the thinking is by putting the academic, the institution, or the teacher first, the needs of the student, the educational output is optimized. A visual analogy we can use, as you see on your screen, is the triangle. In organizations, that visual analogy might mean, well, the C-suite, the CEO, the leaders are at the top. But here, what we're suggesting is that because the institution and the teacher, say within the classroom, are the experts, they're at the top, and then all else are at the bottom. And this is not done out of haughtiness or pride or arrogance. It's done for the sake of the student. So what you're seeing is one very traditional and very tried and true method of structuring. This is also quite cognitive, right? This is quite rational. There's not a lot of room for affection or the non-cognitive within this model. It's not the only model. On the other hand, in the servant view of things, you can put the servant, or you put the student first, and you as the teacher become the servant. You as the institution become the servant. And there's a different mindset here. And you see the rod of Asclepius there on the screen in front of you. So instead of the brain visualization that I used in the previous analogy, this is one of healing. This is one, and anyone that's spent any time in the classroom, you know, you're there to help the students, you're there to serve the students, you're there to foster growth. That is what is meant within this particular symbol. And if we revisit the triangle as a visual analogy, it's inverted. Organizationally, this would mean that the CEO, the power brokers, the shakers and the movers, they're at the bottom, and the way that they lead is by serving, by prioritizing not outputs, but need. In order to get there, Larry C. Spears, one of the other leading thinkers within this movement that I mentioned, he looked at 10 attributes and said that if you want to be a servant leader, you know, one of the things you ought to do is to internally look at these attributes and make sure that, you know, you're growing, you're attentive to these attributes. So it's one thing to talk about, well, one triangle is upside down and one isn't. That's the difference between the traditional model of educational leadership and servant leadership. But another separate related question is, well, how do you get there? Let's say you do like this model. We still have to talk about implementation and some of the practical methods or aspects of this. And so if we were to zoom in, we can see that there are 10 attributes throughout the remainder of this presentation. I'm going to divide these, and I'm going to divide them in a way that I found has been helpful in previous presentations. I look at educational vision, educational mission, and then educational results. And I take 3 of these, and I actually drop one, but I take 3 per vision, per mission, and per result. And I talk about, okay, if you like prioritizing need or becoming the servant teacher, how by using Spears' attributes or perhaps competencies, can we implement this notion within our own asynchronous classrooms here at Ashford? So although I'm not going to go through each and every one of those attributes that's on the screen now, little by little as the presentation progresses, I'll go through as I go through vision, mission, and results. But before I begin, there's one last distinction I want to make, and this is offered by Greenleaf himself, Robert K. Greenleaf. And what he noted was the leader first and the servant first. These are 2 extremes on a continuum. And on any given day, even the servant is going to become somewhat of a institutional leader. It's impossible to stay completely on. We're human beings, we move. So I'm not suggesting that, you know, it's an either or, it's a strict dichotomy, but rather it's a continuum, and on any given day, we're probably going to be somewhere, and the next day, we might be to the left or to the right. But let's just treat this as a continuum for the sake of discussion and for modeling education and how it might be optimized within the asynchronous classroom. So that's the general idea. This is not a, you need to be a servant leader. It's more of, hey, this is what this model represents. This is how you get there. And here are some of the ways that we can implement it here within our own classrooms. That's the point, that's the focus. So let's first look at vision. And to borrow from the organizational scholars, we're going to say that vision is the ideal future state. It's what you want to be, right? And those 3 emboldened concepts at the, say, halfway across the screen here: foresight, awareness, and conceptualization. There are 3 of Spears' 10 attributes. And what I'd like to do is to talk about, okay, I mean, we can all read this, and I'm sure that you're reading as I'm speaking, but what does, say, foresight mean? And if we really do want to prioritize student need first within our specific classrooms, our concrete classrooms, well, how do you get there through foresight? I'm going to suggest one of the things that I've done is to use the analytics that are available through the report. I do realize that now that we've gone to Canvas, I think we're in about our, I don't know, 3 months past, 4 months past. So it's been 1 or 2 courses, 3 courses since the rollout. The analytical reports that we're getting on the spreadsheet basis that's emailed, it has its issues, but it still offers us a chance to see who's engaged, who's not engaged. It's a wonderful way to look at who's doing well, who isn't, who is playing, who is not, and it's a way to stay in touch. So one of the key attributes of a servant leader, specifically related to the vision, would be developing foresight, and the analytics that were provided are a great tool for doing that. Awareness, the ability to view a situation from an integrated, holistic position. So I think some of the tools that I've used and some of the tricks of the trade, if you will, that I've used for awareness are the Ask Your Instructor. That's a good one. Even the introductory posts. I believe that most of our courses, in the first week that you meet, you're required to do an introductory post. These can be quite valuable in understanding where someone's coming from, what perspectives they may be bringing, if they have 9 kids, a job, and they're juggling 9 other things while they're there. So understanding what their needs are through what they're writing, and not just, well, here's another introductory post I have to get through. Oh man, it's valuable, right? And for the servant leader, using those opportunities to really leverage awareness is huge. And another way that vision applies is not just externally, a third party, but first person. Going through personal development and trying to grow whatever field it is that we may be teaching. Always expanding those knowledge horizons, right? That's not just in terms of the students, but in terms of our ability to deliver a quality product, and doing that because it serves the students' needs is another way to practice this attribute, the Spears attribute of awareness. I won't hit every single concept, but I will, try to generate as much as I can. And at the end, in the spirit of servant leadership, which is an open system, maybe some of you can, as you're going and jotting notes, can talk about, hey, for that concept, you didn't talk about it, but I use this, or I use this tool, or, and I would welcome that. So mission is, unlike vision, which is your ideal future state, it's how are you going to get there, right? So, and I realize there are other different ways to define vision and mission results. That's fine. But for the purpose of this brief conversation, this 30-minute session, this is how I'm a working definition for this particular concept. And these are 3 huge concepts within the servant classroom. And I do think they can work very well within the asynchronous. And we all know the asynchronous classroom, it has its challenges, right? There are barriers. You want to connect, but the very platform itself is a barrier to connection. And really, at the core and the key of servant leadership, servant education, servant teaching is connection. So how can you get there? Well, listening is a great way. Well, how can you listen if you can't hear them, if everything is written? A couple of different ways. Active listening can occur through active intake of what they're writing. And it's also learning to read, in between the lines. So that's one thing that I practice. And how do I do that? Well, when I write assignment feedback, I typically give lots and lots of feedback. I go beyond the rubric. If someone does raise their hand and do an ask your instructor, it's more than a pro forma response. Another thing that I'm doing to try to get beyond not the writing mode of communication, go into the verbal, where I can actually hear. I've introduced a tool called Flipgrid. That's Flipgrid. It's free. It's third party. You can put a link to it in a discussion thread. You can put a link to it in an announcement. And it allows, via app or desktop, a student the ability to post. You can set the parameters, but typically it's a 90-second limit. So it's a snippet, right? And many of the millennials tend to like that shorter 90-second and out. And boomers like myself sometimes can go on and on and on and kick a concept till it's dull and not meaningful. So there's something to learn there, right? But Flipgrid allows people who are visual and auditory to hear and see, whereas the relying solely upon the written word doesn't afford us that luxury. It's free, it's easy, it links up, it's a great tool, and I'm using it in a current offering of Business 610. And within the introductory post, I have close to, out of 25 students, say 14 that have used it. I don't always experience that level of success, but I'm very, very happy with that. Now I can hear. And just because I'm hearing doesn't mean that I'm actually hearing, but I hope to use it to foster a better sense of community and therefore drive engagement and therefore drive learning outcomes. So, and I want everyone in that classroom to be heard, and this tool allows me to do it. Empathy, closely related to listening. Another thing that I'm doing besides the Flipgrid, I've developed interactions. I use a tool called Storyline, and in order to really help the student understand the concepts, and for them to actually walk through some of the concepts. And one of the courses I teach is organizational behavior. So it's really helpful for them to not only read and perhaps see a visual about a concept, but to try it on, like Hertzberg's two-factor theory, right? So, well, here's a survey and here's an interaction you can take and you can see how it applies to you personally, right? And then they can tailor that and walk away with a first-person understanding of the concept. I think that's an application of empathy. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm misunderstanding the term empathy itself, but I want them to personalize the content, and I will use the materials and the concepts within the course to do that. And the other obvious answer here is to through feedback, right? And there's lots of opportunities for feedback. The discussion threads. I personally don't have formative assessments, or I'm sorry, summative assessments. So I don't have quizzes. I don't have that other stuff. But I do have discussion threads and writing assignments, and I can use those to sort of recognize someone's personal experience and to encourage them to let that voice be heard. And that's one of the mantras, if you will, of servant leadership. Healing, I realize that healing is not something that typically is something you wrestle with in a classroom. But one of the ways that, and we'll get to this in a future slide, but one of the ways that Greenleaf suggested we can measure the efficacy of our efforts is called the best test. And do those that we teach or lead, are they more apt to become autonomous or to become servants themselves? That is, do they become whole through the process? And maybe whole isn't a warm, touchy-fuzzy. Maybe it means they understand the material and are able to apply it in their day-to-day and professionally. And that's a type of healing. But I've also, experienced healing in the greater sense here, and the idea of being challenged. So servant leadership isn't necessarily, well, we'll just have a large classroom hug and then everything's done. There's still growth assignments, still stretch assignments. There's still the demand for critical thinking and for engagement. But through that process, growth occurs. So those are three of Spear's attributes that I find are quite relevant to mission. And as I promised, I want to talk about results. The three attributes that I've chosen and presented about in the past that are related to educational or classroom results are building community, personal development, and stewardship. So stewardship is I know it's a charged term, and people are saying, well, here comes the religious part. Well, maybe, but stewardship really is about letting go of that leadership mindset where leadership is best defined as an exercise of control and command. And you'll see this organizationally now where leadership is being defined more in flatter terms, and it's shared. It's a one among equals, right? I'd cite the Latin, but that's going to just go back to that religious thing. So let's just move forward. But the idea of going for a flatter, more open systems where there are many people involved in determining direction. And I'm not saying abandon learning outcomes and objectives and ignore the standardization and all the work that's been put forward. And I understand why that's vital and it's necessary. But I am saying within the instance of a classroom, not being top down, not being a one-way communicator is vital to having an engaged and thriving classroom, which also in turn builds a sense of community. Yeah, that tool Flipgrid does help. Sometimes the bells and whistles, the medium becomes the message. The medium is the way, but it's not, you can't get there through technology alone, right? And if you try to fake being a servant leader, it comes out. You can't hide it. If you're not really invested as the leader, however that is going to be defined, because it's not top down. If you try to fake it, it becomes counterproductive. And the degree to which you're faking it is probably related to the barrier, the size and the height of the barrier that you're creating, unfortunately. And then personal development. So for me, this suggests that this isn't just about, helping the students get through. It's about me equipping myself, challenging myself to grow constantly so that I can be more of a docent or a leader. I don't know if you've ever been to one of these national parks. My wife and I, my daughter, went to a park down in Arizona. We were looking for, a park ranger. They don't have those. They have docents, leaders. And what you tell them what you want to experience in the park, and they'll suggest, oh, well, go down there and then try these 3 things. And if that doesn't work, try this. That's more along the lines of the leadership, the stewardship here that's not top down. But also the challenge here is not just them, the students, the institution. First and foremost, as a servant, it's on me, or those he or she whom would be a servant leader. And it's fatiguing, it's tiring, it's never ending, but the results I warrant are worth it. And so finally, here's that best test that I mentioned. Do those served, do they grow? Do they become wiser? Do they become autonomous? In fact, are they likely to become servants in the end?